I got back from a 2-week trip to Alaska to find my son-in-law had moved his own mother into my master bedroom. Her clothes were in my closet. Her perfume was on my dresser. He met me at the door with a shrug and said, "We had a family emergency. You have the guest room." I didn't yell. I just opened my briefcase and showed him the paperwork I'd filed with the court the day I landed. My name is Arthur. That house wasn't just my home. It was the last thing my wife, Elaine, and I built together before cancer took her. For my son-in-law, Mark, it was just empty square footage. And his mother, Barbara, saw an opportunity. This is what happens when family believes your property is their privilege, and a simple no is treated as the opening of a negotiation you never agreed to have. I met my wife, Elaine, in 1987. I was a structural engineer and she was the architect who kept rejecting my building permits. We argued over load-bearing walls for 3 months before we went on our first date. We bought the land for this house in '94, a wooded acre just outside of Bend, Oregon. Elaine designed it. I oversaw the construction. We moved in with our daughter, Chloe, who was 5 years old, the summer the foundation was poured. Every beam in that place we chose together. Elaine passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It was 11 months from diagnosis to the end. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because grief does something to a family's geometry. It removes a crucial support, and sometimes people you trust start leaning on you in ways you never anticipated. Our daughter, Chloe, was 28 when her mother died. She's a kind person, softer than her mother was, maybe softer than I am. A year after the funeral, she started dating Mark. Mark was competent. He managed a car dealership, wore sharp clothes, said all the right things about respect and family. I saw how he looked at my house, though. Not with appreciation for the craftsmanship, but with a kind of mental arithmetic. He'd comment on the square footage, the property value, the wasted potential of a retiree living alone in so much space. I dismissed it as generational noise. My mistake was thinking Chloe's marriage to Mark was just about the two of them. I failed to account for the third person in that union, his mother, Barbara. Barbara was a widow too. Her husband passed about a decade ago, and from what I could gather, he left her with more style than substance. She lived in a condo in Portland that was perpetually about to be sold. She had a way of talking about money that was both vague and desperate. She mentioned a temporary liquidity issue in one breath, and in the next, she'd be showing Chloe photos of a cruise she was thinking of booking. The dynamic was clear to anyone who wanted to see it. Mark was her financial and emotional life raft, and Chloe, by marrying him, had been conscripted into her service. The first test came about 8 months after the wedding. Chloe called me, her voice tight with that particular stress of being caught in the middle. "Dad, Barbara's condo sale fell through again. Her lease is up at the end of the month and the new management company is raising the rent by 40%. She doesn't have anywhere to go." I listened. I asked what Mark thought. Chloe said Mark thought maybe she could stay with them for a little while. Their apartment was a 2-bedroom and they were using the second room as an office. "It would just be for a month or two, just until she finds something," Chloe said. I heard the script she'd been given. I told her it was very kind of them to offer and that I hoped it worked out. I offered to help with a security deposit if Barbara found a new place. The line went quiet for a moment. "Thanks, Dad," she said, but it sounded like I'd given her the wrong answer. Barbara moved into their apartment. The month or two stretched. Chloe's calls became less frequent, and when we did talk, she sounded drained. She'd mentioned how Barbara had rearranged her kitchen, or how she'd volunteered Mark to drive her to various appointments during his workday. The pressure was shifting from a housing problem to a marriage problem. And then Mark found his solution: my house. He brought it up on a Sunday barbecue at my place, just the three of us. He was flipping burgers, being the gracious son-in-law. "Arthur," he said too casually, "we've been thinking. Mom is really cramping our style in that apartment. It's not fair to Chloe, and you've got all this room. You're rattling around in this big place all by yourself. What if she stayed in your guest suite for a bit? She'd be company for you. She's a great cook." He said it like he was offering me a gift. Chloe was staring at her plate, her neck flushed with embarrassment. I took a sip of my beer. I said, "Mark, this is my home. Elaine's and my home. I appreciate the thought, but no, Barbara cannot live here." I made sure my tone left no room for discussion. Mark's smile didn't drop, but it hardened at the edges. "Just think about it," he said. "No need to decide right now." I didn't just think about it. I knew. I'd spent a career assessing risk, calculating load, identifying points of failure. This was a catastrophic design flaw waiting to happen. Letting Barbara move in, even temporarily, wasn't offering a guest room. It was granting a tenancy. In the eyes of the law, and certainly in Barbara's eyes, it would create a claim. Once she had her belongings here, received mail here, it would be a legal nightmare to remove her. I'd seen it happen to a colleague. A temporary stay that turned into a 2-year eviction battle with a niece. I called Chloe the next day and told her my answer was final. I told her I loved her and that I was here for her, but my home was not a solution for Mark's family problems. She cried. She said I didn't understand how hard it was. I told her I understood perfectly. That was why I was saying no. The pressure campaign began. It was never direct, never a frontal assault. It was a siege. Chloe would call with a new crisis. Barbara's back was acting up and the stairs to their apartment were terrible. Barbara was so lonely and I was so alone. Wouldn't it be nice to have someone to talk to? Mark started dropping by with Barbara in tow. They'd bring a dessert, stay for an awkward hour, and Barbara would marvel at the space, at the wonderful empty rooms. She'd talk about how she could help me, how she'd tend the garden Elaine had loved. I was polite. I was firm. I never invited them inside beyond the living room. I documented every visit. I wrote the dates and times in the same project ledger I'd used for work. Instinct told me a storm was coming. The storm's timeline was decided by a phone call from my oldest friend, Jim, up in Anchorage. His son was getting married and he wanted me there. It was a 2-week trip, the longest I'd be away from the house since Elaine died. I told Chloe about it. I asked if she could check the mail for me. She said of course. The night before I left, Mark called. His tone was different, conciliatory. "Arthur, look, I get it. The house is yours. We've been pushing. I'm sorry. Let's just drop it, okay? Have a great trip." It was too neat, too easy. A good engineer knows when a sudden lack of tension isn't peace. It's because the load has been secretly shifted somewhere else. I went to Alaska. I stood beside Jim at his son's wedding, and the whole time in the back of my mind I was running calculations. I called Chloe once from there. She was short, said everything was fine. The call lasted 90 seconds. When my flight landed back in Bend, I felt a heavy certainty in my gut. I drove from the airport under a gray, drizzling sky. I turned onto my street, and I saw the unfamiliar sedan in my driveway. The curtains in my master bedroom, which I always left open, were drawn shut. I parked behind the strange car, my luggage still in the trunk. I walked to my front door. My key didn't fit. The lock had been changed. I stared at my key, then at the new brass deadbolt. I didn't knock. I walked around to the side of the house, to the garage. The keypad code, Elaine's birthday, still worked. The interior door into the kitchen was unlocked. The smell hit me first, a cloying floral perfume, nothing like the citrus and pine scent Elaine loved. The kitchen was clean but different. My coffee maker was pushed to the back of the counter. A shiny new espresso machine sat in its place. A silk orchid arrangement was on the kitchen table. I stood there in the silence, listening. I heard a television upstairs, in my living room. I walked through the first floor, more of her things. A shawl draped over my reading chair, magazines on the coffee table that weren't mine. The house felt occupied, settled into. It didn't feel like a burglary, it felt like a relocation. My heart wasn't pounding with panic, it was beating a slow, cold drum of fury. I took out my phone and opened the camera. I started recording a slow, silent video panning across the foreign objects in my home. Evidence. Then I walked upstairs. The television noise was coming from the guest room. The door was open. Barbara was inside, sitting on the bed, watching a game show. She had a bowl of popcorn in her lap. She saw me in the doorway and didn't startle. She smiled, a wide, placid smile. "Arthur, you're back early. Mark said you weren't due until tomorrow." I didn't move. Barbara, why is your perfume in my kitchen? Why is the lock on my front door changed? She waved a hand as if shooing a minor detail. Oh, that. Mark said it was for security. Since you were going to be away so long, he's so thoughtful. She took a handful of popcorn. I'm just keeping the place lived in for you. Scares off burglars. Where is Mark? My voice was flat. He and Chloe will be by later. They've been so good checking on me. Would you like some popcorn? I turned and walked to the end of the hall, to the door of the master bedroom. My bedroom, Elaine's and my bedroom. It was closed. I turned the knob. It was locked. That one's locked for now, Barbara called out, her voice carrying down the hall. A little mix-up with the key. I turned around. She was standing in the guest room doorway now, watching me, the smile still fixed on her face. It was then I understood the full architecture of the lie. The guest room was the stage. The performance was for me, the just-arrived homeowner. But the master bedroom was the fact. That's where she was really living. The locked door was the truth. You need to leave, Barbara, I said. Now you are not a tenant here. You are a trespasser. Her smile finally faded. It was replaced by a look of wounded dignity. Arthur, that's a terrible thing to say. Mark and Chloe agreed to this. It's a family arrangement. I'm here to help you. Get out. I took a step toward her. She took a step back into the guest room, her hand fluttering to her chest. I can't just leave. All my things. Pack them, you have 1 hour. Then I am calling the police. I went back downstairs to my study. I kept a small fireproof safe in there with documents, passports, some of Elaine's jewelry. It was untouched, but on my desk where my computer usually sat was a note in Mark's handwriting. Arthur had to borrow your laptop for a work emergency. Back soon. P.S. Mom's staying in the guest room for a few days while her new place gets finished. Be cool. Mark. It was dated the day after I'd left for Alaska. They'd planned this. The call from Mark, the sudden apology, it was all a tactical retreat so I'd leave without securing the house. I opened my desk drawer. The spare set of house keys was gone. I picked up my landline phone. No dial tone. They disconnected it. I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked out the window. It was Mark's SUV. He and Chloe got out. Chloe's body language was all tight angles, arms crossed, head down. Mark was striding toward the house, a paper bag in his hand, looking like a man coming home. I met them at the front door, blocking the entrance. Mark's expression flickered from surprise to a forced, jovial mask. Arthur, hey man, welcome back. You gotta use the code on the garage now. I updated the front lock. Got you a better one. He held up the bag. Brought groceries. How was Alaska? I looked past him at Chloe. Chloe, did you agree to this? She couldn't meet my eyes. Dad, it's complicated. It's not complicated, I said. Your mother-in-law is in my house. The locks are changed. My laptop is gone. Answer the question. Did you agree to your mother-in-law moving into my bedroom? The guest room, Mark interjected, his voice hardening. She's in the guest room. I turned my gaze back to him. The guest room door is open, Mark. The master bedroom is locked. Where are her clothes? In the guest room closet or in mine? For the first time, his confidence wavered. He hadn't expected me to check. He thought I'd come home, see Barbara benignly in the guest room, and after enough arguing, just acquiesce. The lock on the master bedroom was a mistake. It was the proof. Look, he said, switching tactics, dropping the friendly tone. We had a crisis. Mom's landlord in Portland started formal eviction proceedings because of the rent dispute. She had nowhere to go. We couldn't have her on the street. You were gone. The house was empty. It made sense. You changed my locks, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. For security. You disconnected my phone. It was a landline, Arthur. No one uses those anymore. We're setting you up with a better bundle. You took my computer. Temporarily, I told you work emergency. I took a step forward and he took an unconscious step back. Mark, you have committed several crimes, unlawful entry, theft, possibly burglary. You have 1 hour to remove your mother and all of her belongings from my property. You will return every key you have made. You will return my laptop in the exact condition it was taken. If you do not, I will not call the police to report a trespass. I will call the district attorney's office and report a home invasion and larceny. Do you understand the difference? Chloe made a small, choked sound. Mark's face went pale, then flushed red. You do that to family after everything we've done for you. You have done nothing for me, I said. You have violated my home. The clock starts now. I turned and went back inside, closing the door in their faces. I engaged the new deadbolt from the inside. I could hear their muffled arguing on the porch. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water with a steady hand, and called the non-emergency line of the Bend Police Department. I reported a trespass in progress, gave my address, and stated that the individuals were currently on the property, and I was requesting an officer to keep the peace while they removed their belongings. I mentioned the changed locks and missing property. The dispatcher said an officer was en route. The next 45 minutes were a chaotic blur. Barbara, now in tears, packed suitcases with Mark's hurried, angry help. Chloe sat on the bottom step of the stairs, crying silently. I stood in the doorway of the living room, watching, my phone in my hand, recording. When Mark went into the master bedroom with a key from his pocket and opened it, I got my confirmation on video. The room was full of her things. The bed was made with her linens. Her cosmetics covered Elaine's dressing table. The police officer, a young man named Officer Reed, arrived. He listened to my concise explanation, saw the suitcases, saw the tension. He reviewed my driver's license and a utility bill to prove residence. He asked Mark for his ID. The dynamic shifted instantly under the gaze of the law. Mark became all bluster and explanation. Officer Reed cut him off. "Sir, is this your primary residence?" "No, it's my father-in-law," Mark said. "And did you have his permission to change the locks and occupy the property?" "It's a family thing. We had an understanding." "A yes or no answer, please." Mark looked at me, then at the officer. "No." Officer Reed nodded. "Then you need to remove your personal effects and vacate the property. The homeowner has revoked your permission to be here. Do you need help loading the vehicle?" It was a polite way of telling him to get out. Under the officer's watchful eye, the last of Barbara's things were hauled out. Mark returned my laptop, slapping it into my hands. He threw a single new key onto the hallway table. "There. Happy," he spat. Barbara, passing by me, stopped. The tears were gone. Her eyes were dry and sharp. "You're a cruel man, Arthur. Elaine would be ashamed of you." It was a calculated strike aimed at the heart. It missed. Elaine would have had her in handcuffs by now. They left. Officer Reed waited until their car disappeared, then gave me a case number, advised me to change the locks again at my own expense, and suggested I might want to look into a restraining order if the harassment continued. I thanked him. The house was quiet again, but it was a violated quiet. The perfume smell lingered. I went into my bedroom. It took me 2 hours to strip the bed, box up every item she'd left, and scrub the surfaces. I opened every window. I found the installer's receipt for the new deadbolt in the kitchen trash. It had been installed on the 3rd day of my trip. This wasn't a last-minute crisis. It was a project plan executed in my absence. I thought that was the end of it. A brutal, ugly day, but the problem was solved. The structure had been breached, but I had shored it up. I was wrong. The breach wasn't the event. It was just the first shockwave. The real structural failure was just beginning. 2 days later, I was served. Not with an apology, but with legal papers. The document was from an attorney named David Finch. It was a petition filed in Deschutes County Circuit Court. The plaintiffs were Barbara Ellison, Mark Ellison, and Chloe Ellison, my daughter. They were suing me for wrongful eviction, emotional distress, and were asserting a claim of promissory estoppel and constructive tenancy. I read the words, sitting at my cleaned-off kitchen table. My hand was perfectly steady. The legalese was dense, but the argument was clear. They claimed I had, through my son-in-law Mark, given verbal permission for Barbara to reside at the property for a period of 6 months to assist me and to provide her housing stability. They claimed I had later, capriciously and maliciously, revoked that permission, illegally locked her out with police involvement, and caused severe emotional and financial harm. They cited the fact that she had received mail at my address, they'd forwarded it, and that she had a key as evidence of a tenancy. They were asking for $50,000 in damages and a court order reinstating her right to occupy the guest suite of my home until a reasonable alternative could be found. Chloe's name on the document alongside theirs was the masterstroke. It wasn't just Mark and his mother against me. It was my own daughter legally aligned with them. It transformed a property dispute into a family civil war. The papers fell from my hands onto the table. I looked out the window at the tall pine trees Elaine had loved. I understood now. Changing the locks wasn't just about keeping me out. It was about creating a new factual reality. They weren't just trespassers. They were, in their own minds and now on a court filing, rightful occupants I had wrongfully removed. They had moved from persuasion to invasion to rewriting history, and they had brought my daughter into the story to play the part of the betrayed grandchild, the moral witness. This was no longer a fight to get someone out of my house. This was a fight to prove my house was still mine. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time just staring at Chloe's printed name. My attorney, a woman named Susan Park who had handled Elaine's estate, told me not to take it personally. It's a legal strategy, Arthur. They're using her to create a narrative of family consensus. It's emotional warfare with a filing fee. But it felt personal. It felt like a surgical strike. Susan was calm, methodical. She said the case was, on its face, frivolous. Promissory estoppel requires a clear promise and reasonable reliance. I had made no promise. We had my project ledger with the dated notes of every unwelcome visit, the police report number from Officer Reed, and the fact that I'd been out of the state when the alleged permission was given. "They're betting you'll settle to make it go away," Susan said. "They're betting you won't want to air this in court, especially with Chloe on the other side." I told her I wouldn't settle for a dime. I told her I wanted it fought to the last motion. The legal process was a slow, expensive grind. We answered the complaint, denying every allegation. We filed a counterclaim for trespass, conversion for my laptop, and the cost of rekeying the house. We entered the discovery phase. This is where you demand documents, answers to written questions, depositions. It's where the other side's story gets stress-tested, and it's where we found the cracks. Mark and Barbara's story was that I'd given verbal permission in a phone call the night before my Alaska trip. They claimed I'd said, "Sure, let her stay in the guest room. It'll be good to have someone watching the place." My phone records, which we subpoenaed, showed no call to or from Mark that night. The only call was my brief check-in with Chloe. Their attorney, David Finch, argued it could have been a quick, in-person conversation, but they had no witnesses beyond themselves. Chloe, in her written responses to our questions, was fuzzy. She stated she believed her father had given permission but could not recall the specific time or words. Susan said that was the tell. Chloe was perjuring herself, but just barely, using the language of belief instead of knowledge. Then we received their document production. It included a series of emails between Mark and his mother that they had failed to properly redact. The metadata was still there. These weren't just notes about moving logistics. They were planning documents. In one, sent a week before my trip, Barbara wrote, "If we establish residency before he returns, the legal threshold changes. He can't just throw us out. It becomes an eviction, and that takes months. We'll have leverage." Mark replied, "Understood. The key is getting Chloe to agree that he said it was okay. She's the linchpin." Another email from Mark to Barbara the day after I left. "Locks changed. Computer secured. He has no smart home stuff to monitor. We are clear. Begin phase 2. Phase 2 was the forwarding of her mail, the setting up of a utility bill in her name at my address, the deliberate establishment of a paper trail to fabricate residency. This was no longer just a flawed case. This was evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud upon the court. Susan was clinical about it. This is our nuclear option. We can file a motion for sanctions, have the case dismissed with prejudice, and potentially refer it for criminal investigation. But she cautioned me. Using it would likely destroy any chance of reconciliation with Chloe. It would put her at legal risk, too. I told Susan to hold it, to keep it in reserve. I wanted to see how far they would go. They went further. David Finch filed a motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. He argued that Barbara was a lawful tenant who had been illegally locked out, and that she would suffer irreparable harm if not allowed to return to the property immediately. He attached an affidavit from Barbara describing her severe emotional distress and fear of homelessness. He attached another from a therapist who had seen her twice. He attached one from Chloe, which stated that her father had a pattern of erratic behavior since her mother's death, and that she feared for his mental stability and Barbara's safety. Reading that one, I had to set the papers down and breathe. It was like reading a description of a stranger, written by a stranger. The hearing for the injunction was set for a Thursday morning. The night before, my doorbell rang. It was Chloe. She was alone. She looked hollowed out. I didn't invite her in. We stood on the porch in the cold. "Dad, you need to drop this," she said, her breath making little clouds in the air. "I'm not the one who filed a lawsuit, Chloe. They're going to win tomorrow. Their lawyer says the judge will likely grant the injunction. They'll let her back in. If you just settle now, we can make it go away. You can give her the guest room officially with a lease for 6 months. Then she'll go, Mark promises." I looked at my daughter. "Do you hear yourself? You are asking me to legally surrender part of my home to someone who conspired to steal it, based on a promise from the man who masterminded the theft. What has he done to you?" Her face crumpled. "He hasn't done anything to me. You have. You're choosing a house over your own family. Mom would hate this. She would hate you for this." It was the second time they'd used Elaine as a weapon. This time it came from my daughter's mouth. It landed. "Your mother," I said, my voice tight, "built this house with me. She fought for every inch of it. She would have taken a baseball bat to the locks Mark installed. Don't you dare invoke her. You, who signed your name to a lie about me." "I'm trying to keep my marriage together," she shouted, tears now streaming. "You don't know what it's like. The pressure, the constant, it's easier to just go along with it." "That's not a marriage, Chloe. That's a hostage situation." "You don't get to say that." She turned and ran back to her car. I watched her go. The grief that night wasn't for Elaine. It was for the living daughter I felt I was losing in real time. The hearing the next day was in a modern courtroom, all pale wood and harsh lighting. David Finch was a man in his 50s with a polished, condescending manner. He presented his case, painting me as a volatile, grieving widower who had whimsically revoked a charitable offer to a vulnerable older woman. He presented the affidavits. Then Susan stood up. She was quiet, precise. She presented my phone records, highlighting the absence of the alleged permission call. She entered into evidence the police report, noting the officer's observation that Barbara's belongings were primarily in the *master* bedroom. And then she played her card, not the nuclear one, but a tactical strike. "Your Honor, we would like to submit the plaintiff's own planning documents, obtained in discovery, which we believe are relevant to the issue of irreparable harm." David Finch objected, stating the documents were subject to a protective order. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Wilkins, overruled him. "You submitted them in support of your case, counsel. They're in evidence." Susan approached the bench with a printed email. "This is an email from defendant Barbara Ellison to her son, Mark Ellison, dated 1 week prior to Mr. Arthur's trip. I'll read the key line. If we establish residency before he returns, the legal threshold changes. He can't just throw us out." She set the paper down. "This is not the planning of someone relying on a gracious invitation. This is the planning of a hostile takeover. The alleged irreparable harm is the failure of a calculated scheme, not the loss of a home." The atmosphere in the room shifted. Judge Wilkins' expression darkened. She asked David Finch if he had seen this email. He stammered, "Your Honor, that's taken out of context. It's a private family." "Did you or did you not review the documents you produced in discovery, counselor?" The hearing ended shortly after. Judge Wilkins denied the injunction. In her ruling, she stated the plaintiffs had not demonstrated a likelihood of success on the merits, and furthermore, the submitted email raised serious questions about the good faith of the plaintiffs' claims. She ordered both parties to continue towards a trial date, but strongly suggested they seek mediation. It was a victory, a complete, unequivocal legal victory. Outside the courtroom, Mark looked at me with pure, undisguised hatred. Barbara was sobbing loudly, leaning on Chloe. David Finch packed his briefcase without a word. Susan touched my arm. "They're wounded. Be prepared for them to get reckless." Reckless came 3 days later. I received a call from my home security company. I'd installed a basic system after the break-in, with sensors on the doors and windows. The representative told me there had been an attempt to deactivate the system using the master code. The attempt had failed, triggering an alert. The code used was Elaine's birthday, the same one for the old garage keypad. The only people who knew that code were me and Chloe. The system logged the attempt as coming from inside the house. I drove home, my heart thudding against my ribs. The house was locked, undisturbed. But in the backyard, I found what they'd been after. The external hatch to the crawl space, hidden behind some shrubs, was slightly ajar. Inside that crawl space was the house's main water shut-off valve and the electrical panel. Someone had been trying to get in to turn off my utilities, to make the house uninhabitable. It was a form of self-help eviction in reverse. If I couldn't live there, maybe I'd let Barbara back in. I didn't call the police. I called Susan, and I told her it was time to unleash the nuclear option. We filed a motion for summary judgment, asking the judge to throw out the entire case without a trial, based on the fraud uncovered in discovery. We attached the full, unredacted email chain. We also filed a separate motion for sanctions against David Finch for pursuing a frivolous lawsuit and for failing to properly vet his client's fraudulent evidence. And finally, we filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office, attaching everything, alleging conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted burglary, and harassment. The fallout was immediate and brutal. David Finch filed a motion to withdraw as counsel, citing an irreparable breakdown in the attorney-client relationship. The court granted it. Mark and Barbara were now without a lawyer, facing a devastating motion they had no way to competently answer and a potential criminal investigation. And then on a rainy Tuesday evening, the doorbell rang again. It was Chloe. She was drenched, shivering, holding a small duffel bag. Her face was swollen from crying. This time when she spoke, there were no scripts, no threats, no pleas. "He left me," she said, her voice a broken whisper. "Mark packed a bag and went to his mother. He said I was a liability. He said I failed. He said a lot of things." She looked past me into the warm light of the house she'd grown up in. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. The legal war wasn't over. The court's final gavel hadn't fallen, but the family civil war had just reached its beachhead right here on my threshold. The battle for the house was entering its final phase, but the battle for my daughter had just begun. I made up the guest room for Chloe, the real guest room with its own lock. She slept for 14 hours straight. I sat in the living room, listening to the rain and the soft, regular sound of her breathing through the baby monitor I dug out of the attic. It was the first peace that house had known in months. In the morning, over coffee, she talked. It was a floodgate opening. The pressure from Mark had been constant but subtle. It wasn't yelling, it was a steady drip of dissatisfaction. She wasn't supportive enough of his career. She wasn't understanding enough of his mother's needs. Her loyalty was always in question, and the easiest way to prove it was to align with him against me. The lawsuit, her affidavit, it was presented as the ultimate test. "If you really love me, you'll help me protect my mother," he'd said. And when the injunction failed, when the emails were exposed, the blame shifted entirely to her. He told her she'd been too weak in her affidavit, that she'd hesitated. He said she'd cost them everything. Then he packed a bag and left. She was broken, but the breaking had let in the light. She saw the manipulation now, not as an abstract concept, but as the cold, daily reality of her marriage. She asked me, her voice small, "Did I destroy everything?" "No," I said. "You escaped a collapsing structure. It was designed to fall." The legal machinery, once set in motion, ground forward with impersonal force. With their attorney gone and our motion for summary judgment pending, Mark and Barbara had no defense. A week after Chloe came home, we received notice that they were dropping their lawsuit. They submitted a one-sentence stipulation of dismissal. In return, we agreed not to pursue our counterclaims or the sanctions motion against them. Susan advised it was the cleanest exit. It meant no admission of guilt from them, but also no chance for appeal. It was over. The criminal complaint to the district attorney's office, however, was out of our hands. A detective contacted me for an interview. I gave it. I provided all the evidence: the emails, the security log about the crawl space attempt, the police report. I was told an investigation was opened. I didn't hear anything more for a while. That's the nature of these things. The wheels turned slowly. Chloe stayed. She started therapy. She found a job at a local library, something quiet and orderly. We didn't talk much about Mark or Barbara. We rebuilt something simpler. We cooked dinners. We watched old movies. We sometimes just sat in the same room reading. The house began to feel like a home again, not a fortress. Then 6 months after the lawsuit vanished, the consequence found Mark. He lost his job at the dealership. It wasn't directly about the lawsuit, I was told by a mutual acquaintance. It was about conduct unbecoming and a breach of ethics. There had been complaints about aggressive tactics, about fudging numbers. The scandal in his personal life, the failed lawsuit and the allegations, gave his employer the final reason they needed. He moved out of state to Nevada with Barbara. The last I heard, he was selling used RVs. The surprising detail came in a letter of all things. It arrived in a plain white envelope with a Portland postmark, addressed to me in a shaky, feminine hand. It was from Barbara's older sister, a woman named Margaret whom I'd never met. She wrote that she was sorry for what her sister had put me through. She said Barbara had always been this way, even as a girl, entitled, manipulative, seeing other people's things as solutions to her problems. She said Barbara had done something similar to their own mother, moving into her house to help and nearly draining her savings before the family intervened. She doesn't see it as wrong, Margaret wrote. She sees it as being resourceful. Mark is her greatest creation. I'm sorry your family was caught in the crossfire. I read the letter twice, then filed it away with the rest of the legal documents. It didn't change anything, but it confirmed something. The problem wasn't me. It wasn't even really about my house. The house was just the nearest available resource. It was a pattern looking for a place to happen. A year to the day after I'd returned from Alaska, Chloe asked me to meet her for lunch at a cafe in town. She had news. She was seeing someone, a teacher from the high school. She said he was kind and quiet and had no complicated entanglements with his mother. She said it softly, watching my face for judgment. I told her I was happy for her, and I was. Then she slid a manila envelope across the table to me. "I need you to have this," she said. Inside was a notarized document. It was a quitclaim deed. She was formally renouncing any and all potential future interest in my house. It was something her new therapist had suggested, a tangible legal act to sever the idea that the house was an asset to be planned for, fought over, or relied upon. "It's yours, Dad," she said. "It was always yours. I don't ever want there to be a question." I didn't know what to say. It was an act of profound understanding. She wasn't just giving up a hypothetical inheritance. She was dismantling the very weapon that had been used against us. I signed the acceptance, my hand not quite steady. We filed it with the county recorder the next week. The final closure came with the changing of the seasons. The criminal investigation concluded. The district attorney decided not to press charges. The official letter stated that while the evidence suggested contentious and unethical conduct, proving criminal intent beyond a reasonable doubt would be difficult. It was the expected outcome. The goal was never to put them in jail. The goal was to create a record, to have the state acknowledge the violation. That record now existed. I took Chloe to dinner to mark the occasion, the true end of it all. Over dessert, she looked at me and said, "Do you think Mom would be proud of how you handled it?" I thought about it. I thought about the bridges I designed. You don't build them to be nice. You build them to hold, to endure specific stresses. You maintain them. You protect them from corrosion. I think, I said, she would have handed me the sledgehammer to break the lock myself, and then she would have designed a better security system. Chloe laughed, a real free laugh I hadn't heard in years. Now I live alone again in the house Elaine and I built. Chloe has her own apartment across town. She comes for Sunday dinners. Sometimes her boyfriend joins us. The house is quiet, but it's a peaceful quiet. The oak tree we planted the year she was born is now taller than the roof. People ask me if I regret not just giving in at the start, letting Barbara have the room for a few months to keep the peace. I tell them no, because it was never about a room for a few months. It was about the fundamental principle of ownership, not just of property, but of your own life. Giving in to emotional blackmail doesn't buy peace. It just finances the next demand. The law is just a tool. It's a precise, expensive, slow-moving tool. But in the end, it's just a reflection of a simple idea. A man's home is his castle, not his family's timeshare, not his in-laws' safety net. His. You have to be willing to defend that line, not with anger, but with the cold, hard facts of deeds and laws and recorded phone calls. You have to be willing to record the evidence, even when it breaks your heart. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are load-bearing walls that hold your life up. And when someone starts knocking on them, insisting they should be allowed to rearrange the furniture in your soul, you don't negotiate. You get an engineer's report. You get a lawyer. You get ready for a fight, because some structures are worth preserving, not just for you, but for everyone who comes after, for the daughter who finds her way back home, for the memory of the wife who helped you build it, for the peace of a Sunday morning with coffee in hand, looking at a tree you planted together, knowing the foundation against all pressure held. So what's the lesson in a story like this? It's not that family is the enemy. It's that the line between family and opportunist is sometimes drawn not by blood, but by behavior. We're taught that turning the other cheek is strength, that keeping the peace is the highest good. But there's a difference between peace and surrender. Peace is mutual. Surrender is unilateral. What happened in my home wasn't a family disagreement. It was a property dispute dressed in the clothing of a family emergency. They used the language of love and obligation to camouflage an act of conquest. And the moment I recognized it for what it was, the moment I saw the changed lock not as an inconvenience, but as a flag planted on my land, was the moment I had to choose. Not between being a good father and a hard-hearted man, but between being a homeowner and a hostage. The law gets a bad rap. People see it as cold, impersonal. But in a situation where emotions are being used as weapons, that impersonality is your shield. It's the thing that allows you to say, this isn't about how I feel. This is about what is factually, legally true. My feelings were all over the place, grief, betrayal, fury, heartbreak for my daughter, but the facts were on my side. The dates were on my side. The deed was on my side. I let the facts carry the weight. I've thought a lot about why this story hits a nerve. I think it's because we all have our version of that lock. It might not be a front door. It might be your time, your money, your emotional energy, your privacy. It's the boundary you set that someone else views as an opening bid. And we're terrified that enforcing that boundary will make us the villain in the story. We're afraid of being called selfish or cold or cruel. So we give a little, and then a little more. Until we're standing in a house that no longer feels like our own, wondering how we got there. The countermove isn't drama. It isn't shouting matches or slamming doors. That's just more emotion, and emotion is their playing field. The countermove is documentation. It is calm, clear communication. It is the strategic, deliberate application of consequence. It is understanding that sometimes loving someone means letting them face the fallout of their own choices. I didn't save Chloe from her marriage. The consequences of her choices and Mark's did that. My job was just to not bail them out, to not set myself on fire to keep their bad decisions warm. In the end, a home is more than wood and nails. It's a story you build with your life. Every scratch on the floor, every paint color chosen, every plant in the garden is a sentence in that story. Letting someone rewrite chapters without your consent isn't generosity. It's erasure. You have to be the guardian of your own story. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Be document-ready. Keep the texts. Write down the dates. Trust the instinct that tells you a favor is feeling like a demand. And know that no is a complete sentence. You don't owe a committee meeting to justify the boundaries around your own life. The foundation holds because you maintain it. Not just the foundation of a house, but the foundation of a self. You shore it up with truth. You reinforce it with action. And you protect it, not because you hate the people on the outside, but because you respect what you've built on the inside. Thanks for listening. If a story like this resonates with you, or if you've faced your own version of a changed lock, consider subscribing. There are more stories where this one came from, and sometimes, knowing how it turned out for someone else is the blueprint you need to start building your own defense. Until next time.